All right, welcome to another meeting of your Senate Judiciary Committee. We have three bills to go through today, and I think the testimony is going to be a little heavier today, just preparing the committee for that, but the goal is still to try to get through all three of these bills. With that, I'll go ahead and do a roll call, Pierre.
Senator Kriegel?
Here.
Senator Crum?
Come back to it, he might make it in.
Senator Hicks?
Excused.
Senator Kolb?
Present.
Chairman Olson?
Here. I guess we'll
Whoever
excuse,
Crum.
we'll excuse Crum. We have a quorum. All right, the first bill for your consideration today is Joint Resolution 5, Congressional Term Limits. I understand the bill sponsor, Representative Larson, is in appropriations, and apparently, Senator Larson. Did I say representative? I think I did. I'm still getting used to that. Many years in the House. But he told me Senator Kolb could present the bill. So I guess that's you.
Mr. Chairman, where would you like me to present the bill?
Wherever you're most comfortable. You can stay right there if you'd like.
Well, I'll do my best, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Before us is Senate Joint Resolution number 5, and it speaks specifically to congressional term limits. And this is dovetailed into the Article 5 convention as one of the resolutions we would have in the state of Wyoming for congressional term limits. And I would, I guess, give me a moment here, Mr. Chairman, but I'll stand for any questions.
Okay. Welcome Senator Crum and Senator Hicks. Do we have, let's see, any questions for Senator Kolb?
No, sir. We can just go through page by page.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Make it easier. Page 1, are there any questions?
Any questions on the whereas clauses on page 1? No, okay, page 2. Continuation of the whereas clauses, and then we have section 1. So section 1, Senator Kolb calls the convention, an Article 5 convention, limited to proposing an amendment to the United States Constitution to set a limit on the number of terms a person may be elected as a member of the United States House or United States Senate. And that's the meat of the bill, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is.
Okay. Anything on page 3 here, section 2? Those are limits on the power of Congress regarding the Article 5 convention. Carries over to page 4, continues the limitations. And over to page 5, the end of the limitations, and then subsection B. This requires 2/3 of the states adopting the same resolution.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's page 5. Any questions on page 4 or page 5? Page 6 is section 3. This just says that it continues as a resolution adopted by our body until the 2/3 threshold is met. And then section 4, Secretary of State transmits copies of the resolution to the President of the United States, to the Senate, and the President of the Senate, and Speaker of the House, and our Wyoming congressional delegation. Any questions on page 6? All right, that is the bill. No questions, then we will go to, Senator Kriegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the only question I would have, and not necessarily for Senator Cole, but just for us to consider, is how is this different from The legislation we've already passed out of the Senate, I believe this was part of that particular joint resolution. And so just throwing that out for conversation piece, maybe not only just for us, but for all the people that might come up and testify. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. That's a good point. Senator Hicks, did you have a question?
No, Mr. Chairman, real quick, so I'm gonna go to
Yep.
page 5 and the subsection B, the convention's just a call for establishing term limits, but it doesn't specify, what's a reasonable, or is it 2 years, or 4 terms, or 6 terms, or a combine between the House and the Senate? And so to me, it's just curious if I can get an answer. Is there an idea what we're looking at when we talk about term limits? Is it 2 terms? Is that 2 terms combined? Or is it just to have this conversation? So just curious as the sponsor, provide some edification on that point.
Senator Kolb?
I believe the intent, because it's not listed, is for us to discuss what we believe is the proper amount of term limit for be it House or Senate seats, which has not yet to be determined. I think it dovetails in with the first bill we had and the question about why is it now being, asked separately. I think it's for a conversation about what we feel term limits should be. So I think it's open-ended at this point on what we would consider for a term limit. It's a discussion for the entire body to have.
Any other questions for Senator Kolb? All right. With that, I will move to public comment. We have some folks online, but we're going to go to the room first. Those wishing to make public comment. Raise your hand if you're here to make public comment on this. Okay, so we got a couple. We'll start here. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Keith Kennedy for U.S. Term Limits, and I'll be very brief and introduce my companion here. First thing that I would point out is in the whereas clauses, one of the ideas here is that we do not believe that Congress will let this get to the point where it becomes an Article 5 convention, and that they will send something to the states, and that is one reason that we haven't specified any number of term limits or number of years, because we actually, although it's very possible it could go to an Article 5 convention, we consider it much more likely that Congress would act when we reach a certain threshold, and rather than entrust the states with this. And with that, I'll let my companion take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Constantine Curard. I work with U.S. Term Limits. I get to spend time in the western states, so I get all the pretty states. Basically here on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of Wyomingites who support term limits on Congress. I know you folks just debated Convention of States a few days ago, and that passed, and so a lot of the questions that I'm used to getting have probably already been asked and answered. But I will take a moment to just respond to the query that Senator Craigo had in terms of why this when we've already done Convention of States. And it's really the same reason why the balanced budget amendment exists as a standalone proposal. It's at 27 states. Convention of States is at 19. We just passed North Carolina. I think we're at 9. It's kind of a race to see who gets there. You don't necessarily want to put all your eggs into the single basket of will Convention of States get there. Also, our effort does rely to a large degree on preemption, which is historically how amendments have taken place. It is state pressure that accumulates until Congress actually drafts the amendment, proposes it, and sends it to the states. Congress preempts the states when there are sufficient states, and that's why we're here. Very difficult, almost impossible to preempt Convention of States, because with COS the goal is a convention, not necessarily preemption. So where BBA or term limits maybe are saying, okay, we're going to get to enough states that Congress will act. That's kind of what makes it different, and why it's important to kind of press every option we have. The one concern I have heard yesterday and today that I'll spend a couple moments on and then defer to whatever questions you have, has to do with the idea that we already have term limits and they're called elections. I don't know to what degree this was debated last week or when Convention of States was passed. And that is true at the state level for most states. But sadly, it's absolutely not the case at the federal level. Federal races are effectively rigged in favor of the incumbents, which is why their retention rate, in spite of their unpopularity, hovers in the mid to upper 90s. And when incumbents do lose, which shows up in the stats, it's usually to another incumbent. It's as a result of redistricting or someone has moved or lines have changed, or it requires truly exceptional circumstances. Members of Congress belong to one of the least popular institutions of the world, yet they can't be defeated in a popularity contest. So clearly there is something that is not working. They're generally reelected in spite of poor performance, absence from work for weeks or months. These days, for significant cognitive issues. They've amassed $36 trillion in debt, imposed countless unwarranted regulations on a population that didn't ask for it, yet they remain untouchable and unbeatable. Largely because they also receive 97% of super PAC funding. They enjoy fundraising advantages worth millions. They benefit from taxpayer-funded franked communications, which allows them to communicate to their district and build positive name ID 24 months out of a 24-month cycle. Political parties discourage challengers. PACs overwhelmingly support incumbents, and the media provides them with significant media exposure. When it costs $4 to $5 million to launch a credible challenge to an incumbent, it's not a surprise that serious challenges are rare and most serious candidates don't run. It's not a fair fight. Most serious candidates don't run. I think Ballotpedia estimated that more than 80% of races weren't even seriously contested. So at the state level, it's different. You guys are part-time. You live in your communities. You're accessible to your constituents. It doesn't take millions of dollars to run for state office. Your elections work as they're intended. Voters can make meaningful choices in a state like Wyoming, and your accountability and responsiveness to them reflects that. Compare that to Congress's lack of lack of accountability. Congress is today an imperial power that rules without really true consent. We have cases where members move their families to Virginia or Maryland full-time, where on their taxes they claim a Virginia residence as their primary residence, and they do this without any fear of the voters getting mad at them or taking it personal that you don't even live in our state anymore. I guess metaphorically, if I want to retire my truck for a truck that's better and newer, but it costs $250,000 for a new truck, I'm going to stick with my old truck. But it wouldn't be right for you to claim that I chose to stick with my old truck because I love it, and for us to act like I had a real choice. I can't afford a $250,000 new truck. Voters want real choices, but right now they're dining at a restaurant that's just got one thing on the menu and being told they can order whatever they want. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to fix, and that has to do with the idea that elections are term limits. I'll stop there because I don't want to filibuster, but happy to take questions on other topics or other concerns.
Questions, committee? All right, we appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Allred. Former Secretary of State, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak in opposition to this resolution. You know, it's really tough because a lot of my friends are on the side of pushing for a convention.
Mr. Allred, would you just?
Oh, I apologize.
Well, I was
Carl
gonna
Allred from Evanston.
two things. I was going to have you do that, then I was going to ask you if you could remove your hat
Oh,
while testifying.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, as I say, you know, anytime the subject of convention comes up, it's kind of, it's tough because like I said, there's good friends on both sides of this deal. But one of the things that unfortunately has been publicized a lot is some not exactly truth statements about this. And one of the things I always ask people is, have you actually even read Article 5? Because in Article 5, the only participation from the states, and I have all the respect for the legislature, I love you guys because you can make things that are better for the people. But the only part of the state's involvement in Article 5 is to petition Congress to call a convention. That's it. Then you're done. Now you can put all the sideboards you want in there and stuff, but some of the things is Congress makes that call to convention. And with any convention, and I know several of you have been to conventions before, the call to convention contains the apportionment of delegates. So no matter what people say about one state, one vote, Congress makes the call to convention. They will apportion the delegates. And looking just at real world stuff, in what world do we think that New York, California, Texas are going to allow Wyoming to be on equal footing with these states? It's a nice thought. I personally do not believe that will happen, knowing Congress. And again, they make that call. The other part of it is, and I like where we try to say, okay, well, we're going to limit them to this and this subject. But as those of you who have been to conventions know, number one order of business, as soon as the doors close and the body is seated, they vote on the rules. This body, just a few years ago, called a special session to deal with the COVID-19 stuff. The rules went out the door. And actually, nothing got done about COVID-19. So that's one of the things that will happen at this convention. The minute the body is seated, they're going to vote on the rules. No matter what the state has told them, they're going to vote what subjects they're going to talk about, what they're going to allow, what they're not going to allow. And it's the body who makes that rule. And then we always say, well, we got the backstop of the ratification. Well, once again, Congress decides whether it's going to be the legislatures who ratify it or whether they're going to be conventions in the state to ratify these. And, you know, looking at a lot of the legislatures around the state, do you really trust them? Wyoming's one of the best there is. But if you look at all the others, do you really trust them to protect your rights that we have under our current Constitution? I don't. And these are just some of the things, you know, that I wish people would really just be hesitant and cautious about this. I love the subjects. You know, we talk about term limits, we talk about balanced budget, we talk about some of these other things. And I would love to see a bunch of that stuff passed. But is it worth the danger of opening up our Constitution? You know, if we could put this in and lock it down, I'd probably be more in favor of it. But there is nothing in Article 5 that says you can do that. There is nothing in there. You get to petition Congress to call for the convention. That's it. That's the end of it. And I just think the risks are too high with what we look at. And so I would hope that you guys would vote this down. And I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Allred? Senator, oh. Nope, all right. Thank you, Mr. Allred. Mr. Carenti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just trying to protect the taxpayers' investment here.
Appreciate that.
Joey Carenti, Rural Wyoming Matters. On and against. I heard some things that are a little concerning and I think should be at least discussed, if not also concerning to the committee, that somehow it's cost prohibitive to run for a certain office. There's nothing you do in being elected by the public that isn't cost prohibitive, depending on what level you're sitting at. We do have people in rural Wyoming who have run for federal office, but it isn't federal office really. It's the state representation at the federal level. So earlier I heard that state elections are a little different, a little easier, but federal elections are quite different. There's no such thing as a federal election. You engage in the same process. There's a few rules from the federal level. The FEC does regulate things differently. But my real concern is if we support a change to the US Constitution that affects the current statutory qualifications for office here in Wyoming, are we really providing more options? by saying, you're totally qualified for office, but you've just done it so long that this is the qualification. Your time and service to the people is now your disqualifying factor. I have a concern about that. I also don't see anything in the Constitution that currently says term limits, nor do I see anything in the Constitution that says if you are going to take your time, your effort, and your energy to serve the public trust as a representative, as many as you know, there's nothing in the Constitution saying it's supposed to be fun, easy, or cheap. It's supposed to be hard. Defending liberty and representing people should be the hardest thing anybody does every day, even if it's somebody you're opposed to. Their opportunity to be able to do that, to choose to do that, whether it's hard or not, I just don't think that should be a top-down change. Now, if it is a top-down change, many of us belong to an organization that has a principle that says judicial changes don't change the Constitution, and the Constitution changes don't automatically change the law. So we're already asking the legislature, if this is passed, to address all of those qualification rules that we currently have in the Green Books. I think that might be taking on undue and unnecessary work, considering the people want more options. They need to realize they are the option. They are the qualifying factors first that you be a resident of the state in some cases. So if you want more options, get up, run for something. But I do not see how limiting options increases options by saying the people that can and have done it, taken on the hard work, or willing to take on the hard work that's not supposed to be easy, not supposed to be cheap, and has served us for so long, has to be changed so we can somehow make it easier, cheaper, or, I don't know, expand the list by reducing who can be on the list. And with that, I stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Mr. Correnti? Yes, Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, so when I look at this whole discussion, I have to boil it down for myself for two things, and let's call it the lesser of two evils, but I'd like you to maybe opine on which one of these that you would determine is probably the greatest threat to freedom and liberty. Long-term elected officials would be one of those, which I think this is designed to try to remedy that, or lifelong deep state bureaucrats running a bureaucratic state. So which one of those is the biggest threat?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'm going to go with the latter. I think the bureaucracy, because it doesn't matter who you elect into or out of office. If the bureaucracy is still there, you still have the same machine and the same managers and maintenance guys of those machines running those machines. It doesn't seem to change when we change, even from a chief elected official in some cases, the function of the bureaucracy. As far as having long-term elected officials, I'm going to go back to something I hear in this chamber and in the other side. I'm sorry, we're not on the floor right now, but in the legislative chambers a lot as we talk about local control. With local control comes local responsibility. So if you have a fear of long-term elected officials, it's not just your job to vote for the other guy. It's your job to find another candidate, help them with a successful campaign, return that responsibility back to the people, because we do believe in local control. But I've always believed that, yeah, the operators of the machine are way more important than the manager sitting in the office saying, that's my machine out there.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Correnti. Anyone else wishing to testify on this bill in the room? If not, let's go online. I believe we have 3 people signed up. Okay, former Representative Halverson. Looks like Carpenter wins the race. Carpenter, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Kelly Carpenter, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Thanks for the opportunity to join you virtually from Laramie today. Sit in support of this bill. My members have policy supporting congressional term limits. We don't believe somebody should be allowed to be in congressional seats for a vast majority of their lifetime. Recognizing they can be voted out, but this would help ensure the rotation of elected officials that impact our industry and our country such a great deal. With that, I'll be brief. Thanks again for the opportunity, and I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Carpenter? All right, thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Ms. Halverson, welcome. Oh, you're muted.
Well, that was embarrassing.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I am Marty Halverson, and I am representing myself today. The group U.S. Term Limits in 1999 lost in the United States Supreme Court in a unanimous decision against term limits. So they have been working ever since to get a term limit amendment into the Constitution. Our U.S. senators and representatives are the only members of the federal government that come home to face the voters. Please do not support this call. I stipulate that many of the congressmen now and senators are part of the numerous problems that have plagued our relationship with the federal government, but they are only one cause of the very serious congressional and government dysfunctions. The others are the real permanent political class that are long-serving, partisan, unelected bureaucrats at every level who cannot be fired. They are long-serving, powerful, partisan, unelected congressional and congressional committee staffers. They are long-serving, unelected, powerful, highly paid, special interest lobbyists who write the bills for the long-serving, unelected, partisan congressional committee staffers. There's a rotating, highly paid academic and crony capitalist contractor consultants. They're wealthy, partisan, issue-oriented foundations that work with and influence the administrative, rule-writing, unaccountable bureaucracy. What amendment or amendments could a convention possibly bring to fix all of this? Officials who are political appointees are already serving at the pleasure of an incumbent president. As a matter of fact, they are the only government officials that are term limited. Most of the employees of the federal government are protected by the 1883 Civil Service Act, enacted in the Progressive Era and strengthened regularly since, and their unions. Witness the efforts of two presidents of different parties and the many years it took to finally fire the director of the Veterans Administration. Our country's earliest document, the Articles of Confederation, included term limits, known at the time as rotation, but they were omitted in the 1789 Constitution in favor of frequent elections. Those who stood against term limits in 1789 argued that regular elections by the people could be a better check on corruption than constitutional limits, and that such restrictions would create their own problems. On the other hand, long-serving representatives and senators use their tenure to more effectively advocate for constituents who need to deal with the deep state bureaucracy, recently called the federal colossus of the Social Security Administration, Medicare, or Veterans Affairs, just to name three. Than new congressmen who arrive in Washington, D.C. with expiration dates stamped on their foreheads. Please know that the average tenure of a U.S. congressman is 6.5 years. Exactly who is driving term limits and exactly why? Exactly who is so invested in limiting the terms of the only people that have to go home to face the voters and to assess firsthand the impact of their decisions, that so much money and effort has been poured into this terrible idea? Term limits may add rotation to the legislative branch, but it will only cede additional power to a permanent fourth branch of government, unaccountable, can't be fired, bureaucratic staffers who do not stand for election. And Mr. Chairman, I have one 30-second anecdote. In my first term in the Wyoming House, a young staffer from one of our agencies came up to me after a meeting and said, Representative Halverson, you electeds come and go. I'm here forever. We just wait you out. Now, what's bothersome on one level about this is that she was young that I don't think she learned this. She was shame on Wyoming. So please vote no on Senate Joint Resolution 5. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Any questions for Ms. Alverson? All right, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your comments. What about Mr. Stahl? All right, let's admit him. Welcome, Mr. Stahl.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, great. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Eldon Stahl from Evanston, Wyoming. Good to see one of my fellow Evanstonites there. And I'm against SJ 5, well, 2, I guess, if we count Mr. Chairman, he's from Evanston. So, but here we have a prime example of the marketing of these resolutions. It's the same hook, but different bait. This time it's term limits. Yes, this resolution, just like the last one, has term limits in it. So if you still believe that the claim to be true that the wording in the resolution actually limits the convention, sending this resolution to the floor would be redundant and unnecessary. But this resolution is about changing the Constitution, period, just like the last one. Amazingly, I have people say, but we're not trying to change the Constitution, just amend it. Now, come on. Have you ever seen an amendment that changes nothing? It's ridiculous. So when you have people making ridiculous arguments like that, they either don't know what they're talking about or they aren't being honest. Speaking of something that's not based in history, let's just say it that way, we heard from the proponents that we're not trying to trigger a convention. We just want to, get close to a convention, and then Congress will be scared and they'll propose the amendment. You would think that history would back up that as a reliable tactic, but it does not. The only one that you can really point to that might have that would be the 17th Amendment. At the time, because of the number of states, 2/3 of the states was 32 states. They got 29 states to apply for a convention, and Congress did propose that amendment. But let's take a look at, for example, the Bill of Rights. You needed 10 states to trigger a convention. 2 states applied for a convention. But Congress, so we didn't get close to triggering a convention, but Congress proposed the Bill of Rights anyway. Women's rights to vote. There was a push for a convention. 0 states passed that to apply for a convention. They needed 32 states, but that Congress proposed that anyway. Repeal of prohibition. 4 states out of 32 needed, applied for that, and Congress proposed that amendment. Presidential term limits. 5 states wanted a convention. They needed 32. Congress proposed that. So not getting close, but still Congress proposes. Then we have the other side of it, where we get enough that fairly close or very close to triggering a convention, and Congress does not propose a convention, or does not propose the desired amendment. For example, anti-polygamy amendment. They got 19 out of 32. Congress didn't do anything. Right to life amendment. 19 out of 34 needed. Congress didn't propose it. Repeal the income tax. 25 out of 34 needed. Congress did not propose that. Balanced federal budget. 32 out of 34 states applied for a convention. Congress didn't propose that convention. And apportionment. got within one state, 33 out of 34. You think Congress would propose that amendment, but they did not. So really the record of history doesn't support their talking point that this is going to be good. This is going to trigger Congress proposing this convention. So what are we really about here? Well, frankly, Congress is in charge already of calling a convention right now. And how do I know that? Well, have you ever noticed that sometimes we only see what is obvious and right in front of us when someone points it out? Okay, let's entertain that thought. So the most important decision in the convention process is whether to call the convention. If it's not called, there's no convention. So Article 5 says that you need 2/3 of the several legislatures to force Congress to call the convention. But by the plain meaning of the words, could Congress call a convention today? Well, yeah, they could. 2/3 of the states have applied for a convention, but Congress hasn't called it. Of course, the proponents will say, well, that's because they have to be all on the same subject. Is that what Article 5 says? No. That is a conclusion that's drawn and seems to be the current practice of Congress for deciding whether to call a convention. Congress is filling in where the Constitution is silent. Let's say Congress changes its mind and calls a convention. How do the states stop it? Congress counts the applications today and in practical terms is in charge of whether we have a convention. Obviously, this is not a ministerial act. Congress is counting applications by using some judgment and discretion. Now, if we have a convention, why all of a sudden would Congress not still use its discretion on other questions left unanswered by Article 5, the ones that have been debated for years? You know, number of delegates, who pays for the convention, number of votes for state, how delegates are selected, limitation on the agenda, and so on. So let's say you go to court. Well, okay, Congress points to their power to call a convention, and they argue what they feel that entails as far as that power. States disagree, and all the states have to point to is their ability to apply for a convention. And the argument that the states are in charge of the convention quickly falls apart. So finally, let's look at some basics to wrap up. The power to alter constitutions is based upon the ultimate power of the people to alter or abolish their government, as it says in the Declaration of Independence. The Article 5 Convention has the power to draft changes to the federal constitution that governs all 50 states. The state legislature, on the other hand, makes laws for the state, not for any other states. So how can a state legislature that makes laws for its own single state control another body that has the power to propose reforms for a constitution over 50 states? Without question, the state legislative and federal constitutional amendment powers are on completely different legal planes. Well, once again, if you take the bait, you get the hook. So please oppose SJ5, and I thank you to stand for questions.
Any questions from Mr. Stahl? All right, thank you for your testimony. How long has that been muted? Oh. Now you can probably hear us. All right,
That's why we have those words across the bottom, Mr. Chairman.
the captions, hopefully the captions. All right, we gotta try that we gotta do that all over again. Sorry, guys. Senator Kolb, did you have a response to Senator Crum's question?
No, I do not. I believe that it's just one more, more defining what a term limit question is. I think we're not prepared to, right now, I think it's maybe a moot point, but I think it's to say that we are in favor of term limits, and then we define them. I suppose at this point, I'm doing my best I can do with this right now. At a later point in time.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on this bill? All right, let's do a roll call vote on Senate Joint Resolution 5.
Senator Kriegel,
Aye.
Senator Crum,
No.
Senator Hicks,
No.
Senator Kolb,
Aye.
Chairman Olson.
No.
3 noes, 2 ayes.
All right, the next bill for our consideration is Senate File 77, compelled speech is not free speech. Senator Hutchings, you're up.
Sorry about that. My facial expression, I was thinking 113 for some reason.
Oh,
So it's like, what?
I wasn't sure I was confused by your expression.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
I was trying to figure out what I did wrong. All right, go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I bring before you compelled speech is not free speech. This bill passed through committee last year and out of the Senate. I was really proud of that, and then it got held up in the House. So this is a very plain and simple bill. A constituent brought this to me, and when I first heard it, I thought, no one's gonna really be interested in this. And then I found out when I started getting emails and phone calls, a lot of people are concerned about this issue. I'll quickly go through the bill and do my best to answer any questions. I want to keep the main thing, the plain thing. This is an act relating to the administration of government, prohibiting the state and its political subdivisions from requiring the use of preferred pronouns, authorizing a civil remedy, providing an exception to the Wyoming Governmental Claims Acts, and providing for an effective date. On page 2, simply states on line 2 that the state and its political subdivision shall not compel or require an employee to refer to another employee using the employee's preferred pronouns. You've received a handout which lists on the front page pronouns that we generally learn in grade school and K through 12. But if you turn the page, you'll see pronouns that have been pretty much made up and would be hard for any employee to try to keep up with in the workplace, because you could use one or more. Secondly, on page 2, we have as a condition, an employee cannot be required to use a employee's preferred pronouns as a condition of employment, as a condition of granting loans, permits, contract licenses, or other benefits afforded by the state or political subdivisions under the threat of adverse action. Any person aggrieved by a violation of the subsection may file a civil action. And then on page 3, we have granting immunity from tort liability, liability on contracts exception. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that is the plain thing on the law. The government shall not compel someone to say something they do not want to say. And that's it. I sit for questions.
Senator Hutchings, you said that this bill was brought to you by a constituent.
Yes, sir.
Did that constituent have an issue that happened with a governmental entity compelling them to use these pronouns?
Mr. Chairman, that's what I was told, and so I went with it. I could only believe that what they were saying to me was the truth. And then when I started hearing from other people, they too voiced concerns. And when I went to some of the lawyers here in the Capitol, they too were concerned that this bill may be violating some laws that the previous administration were pushing down. And as I read through every law that they gave me, I found out that that just was not true. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Crago?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this to us. Just a question, and I wanted to focus on the enforcement part of this. And we've had this discussion over the last couple weeks already several times on the floor. And so my question for you is this: are you just looking for an enforcement mechanism so that the person aggrieved can actually get the problem solved, or do you have to have the damages provision within the law? Because that starts, I've mentioned this a couple other times, we're going to create so many exceptions to the Governmental Immunity Act that there won't be an act. And so I'm just curious if we just put an enforcement mechanism in that said, hey, you can bring a declaratory judgment to protect your rights, but not in money damages cause of action. Are you following me? And I'd just love your thoughts on that.
Senator Hutchings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Crago, I agree with you wholeheartedly. When I had this bill drafted, that's just what I was told, but I would have no problem removing it at all. Thank you.
Other questions for Senator Hutchings? Senator Crum?
I like the direction of this bill. My one question is, what about if I called the good senator to my left here, I started just saying, she's doing this, she's doing that, and it's really in a hazing point of view. How do we handle that type of situation?
Senator Hutchings?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Crum, that's an interesting question. Never thought of it. If the senator next to you was a she, I'd have no problem with you saying that. And hopefully she would not have any problem with you saying that. I think we'll just keep the main thing, the plain thing, and that is, if you want to call her by her name, that would be awesome. But the main thing here is the government cannot force you to say anything you do not want to say, and that's the gist of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Crum?
my question really is, the good senator is a him.
Oh.
And I referred to him as a she in a derogatory manner. You know, she is this, she is that. That's my question.
We give you a pair of boxing
Because I think
gloves
we
and
all
send
agree
you out
with-
back.
At least I agree with he, she, them, us, and I'm using she as a, and he, so that's my question.
Senator Hutchings?
Chairman Olson, Senator Crum, again, a great question, but I don't think I can answer that here. I don't think it's complying with what we want to do here in the law, except for the fact that if the good senator next to you was a he, and he did not like you saying that to him, continually calling him a she, I think he would have some remedy. That's just my thought. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions for Senator Hutchings? All right, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
State agencies. Do we have any state agencies wishing to testify on this bill? Yes. Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Dr. Ben Moritz. I'm Executive Director of the Community College Commission. Thank you and the members of the committee for having me. We have no position, yay or nay, on this bill. We did want to share some concerns that this could have a chilling effect on either academic discourse or moving on even in the hiring procedures. I do note that the amendment, or at least the language around a possible amendment of making it more of a declarative remedy rather than a financial one, does reduce that concern somewhat. But I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't bring up just some of those concerns. Specifically, even though the prohibition of requiring a particular pronoun, anytime that there is a legal ramification around the use or not use of a pronoun, there are some courses that might be offered where the discussion of pronouns, even on a historical standpoint, took place. And would a faculty member, would a student be concerned that going into these discussions that it could be, that there could be ramifications at a legal standpoint? It's hard to account, it's hard to quantify a possible chilling effect. And that's why we are neither for or against. We just wanted to bring that up. So if I can answer any questions, I'd be happy to. Otherwise, that concludes my testimony.
It's always helpful when the testimony is we're neither for nor against this.
You like
It
that?
really gives us direction. Thank you for that.
Anytime.
Any questions for Mr. Moritz? Yes, Senator Kolb?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You bring up an interesting question about the use of pronouns or not, but it's specifically, it says requiring the use of a preferred pronoun, not during the course of a discussion. It's not a requirement, that's a discussion. So I really see a distinct difference between, I guess, that concern and what this bill's trying to do, and I guess what your opinion is on that difference. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Moritz?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, you're completely correct that this is about a prohibition about being forced to use a pronoun. There is a context and an atmosphere around those discussions. And that is where we have heard some concerns from faculty in particular that will this make having frank and open discussions more difficult? It is a different topic, but could it have that chilling effect? We're asking that question.
Any follow-up? No? Other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Moritz. Any other agencies wishing to testify? If not, I'll move into general public comment. This is not the Education Committee. It's weird seeing you here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I know it's rare that I get to make an appearance before the Judiciary Committee, but good gentlemen, I will be quick. So I just wanted to flag a couple of concerns. So the Bostock decision in 2020 stated that—
Just for the record, could you start by introducing yourself? We know who you are, but we need you to put it on the record.
Tate Mullen, Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. So the Bostock decision concluded that gender identity is a protected class. And following that decision, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, within some of their Title VII hearings and cases, have applied that. And this gets directly to Senator Crum's question. So what that means is that if you accidentally say, if you misgender somebody, that's not a big deal. But if you do it in a harassing way, there are still those pieces, right, that employer-employee or employee-to-employee dynamic that raise the question of a hostile work environment. There have been, so that they would be up for a Title VII hostile work environment claim. So it puts employees as well as the employer in a really kind of precarious position. I just wanted to flag that for you all. That's something you should take into consideration. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
Questions from Mr. Mullen? All right. Just on that body of federal law, even if we pass this Senate file, if this were enacted, that body of federal law would still apply, right? So the ability for someone to bring an equal employment opportunity dispute would still be available to them under that scenario, or any scenario similar.
Mr. Chairman, correct. What becomes problematic, though, is that within this, yes, so that employee can still file a Title VII claim. Within that employee-employer dynamic, they're stuck between that federal law and what might apply with this state law. So that's something that I think you need to maybe take a peek at.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allred?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'd like to be in support of this bill.
I'm Carl Allred.
Oh, you're right. I thought I've already done that. No, my name's Carl Allred and I'm from Evanston. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anyway, I'd be in support of this bill. I'll tell you, I think we've lost our freaking minds in this country lately. All these people want to be called something or whatever. I really don't care what they want to be called. Growing up, I remember we used to have this thing, and I know you guys have heard it, about sticks and stones, I know we have all, at least we've all called people names. And sometimes you get a thick skin and you just grow up and deal with it. But when people start telling me that because of a job, I have to call somebody by something that isn't real. I mean, people say they want to be called they or them. Well, they're not plural, they're one person. Grammatically, that doesn't make sense. But if you want to be called that, Mr. Chairman, I can call you Jared. I don't have to call you he or him or anything like that. There's plenty of other options that I can call you by your name. But I'll tell you, this is a real problem in today's world. My brother had a very good job, and when they went in for a training thing, they wanted them to write their preferred pronouns down. Well, my brother lost his job because he refused to do that. I don't have to give you pronouns. Call me who I am. Call me by my name. And people have lost their jobs over this stuff. It's gotten crazy. And so I believe this is a good step in the right direction. The state definitely, our government shouldn't be, harassing people, costing their jobs and things like that just because they don't want to buy into this ideology. If you want to, that's great, do it. But it should be voluntary, it shouldn't cost you your job. Anyway, I thank you for your time.
Any questions for Mr. Allred? All right, thank you. Other public testimony? Mr. Winters, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, committee, Nathan Winters, President of the Wyoming Family Alliance, and I'm thankful very much for already the conversation you brought. I know this is a very important issue. When we talk about the subject of compelled speech, it is fine for one to believe something about themselves, even if it doesn't line up with the reality, and that's because it's between them and their own conscience. And yet, when they compel someone else to acquiesce to their own belief, that is problematic because it forces that other individual into what they would believe to be a lie. As a result of that, when we look at government and the power it has over those who serve within government, it is important that government not be in the position of forcing those to violate their conscience, especially in regards to speech like this. And so I have received a number of phone calls from across the state where people are frustrated with having to write that I am a she, her, or my pronouns, or whatever it would be. We see that over and over and over again. And I think it's really begun to frustrate people because they also then are told that they would have to call someone a Zim or Zer or all sorts of different terms that really do not comport with both reality from an objective sense, but secondly, it forces them to become complicit in what they believe to be a lie. And as a result of that, I really think that this is good legislation. I do appreciate it doesn't allow for tort action and a lot of other things. I think it's a pretty carefully designed bill, and so I appreciate this bill, and so I rise in support of it. With that, I'd stand for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Winters? All right, thank you. Ms. McCoy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senators. I am here today in strong support of Senate File 007.
Make sure you start by introducing
Oh,
yourself.
yeah, sorry. My name is Patricia McCoy. I'm here as a civilian of Laramie County. I'm here today in strong support of Senate File 0077, a crucial piece of legislation that safeguards one of our most fundamental rights, freedom of speech, which includes the freedom from compelled speech. Let me share a simple yet powerful truth. Words matter. And in a free society, the government should never compel its citizens to speak words they don't believe in. This isn't about being unkind or disrespectful. It's about protecting the constitutional right of every Wyoming citizen to speak according to their own conscience. Think about the precedent we set when we allow the government to dictate the words its employees must use. Today it's pronouns, but where does that end? Our founding fathers understood that the power to compel speech is the power to control thought. That's why the First Amendment protects not only our right to speak freely, but also our right to not speak at all. This bill doesn't prevent anyone from using their preferred pronouns. It doesn't stop any employee from choosing to use colleagues' preferred pronouns. It simply says that the government cannot force its employees to use specific pronouns under threat of punishment or loss of employment. We've seen cases across the country where dedicated public servants such as teachers, social workers, and administrative staff face harassment, demotion, or termination for simply declining to use preferred pronouns. This isn't about denying anyone's identity. It's about protecting everyone's right to speak according to their own conscience. This bill provides clear, reasonable protections. It creates a straightforward legal remedy for those who face coercion, and most importantly, this bill confirms that here in Wyoming, free speech includes the fundamental right to be free from government-mandated expression. Look around this room. Every single one of us knows someone who's staying quiet, who's living in fear of that HR complaint, that supervisor's warning, that final notice, all because they dared to stand by their own beliefs. These aren't just hypothetical scenarios. These are real Wyoming stories, real Wyoming families, and real Wyoming values at stake. Members of the committee, this bill represents Wyoming values: freedom, individual liberty, and limited government. It protects all of our citizens while harming none. It upholds constitutional principles while ensuring respectful workplace environments. I urge you to vote yes on Senate File 0077 because in Wyoming, we don't just talk about freedom, we defend it. We don't just claim to protect individuals' rights, we enshrine them in law. And we never forget that in our great state, the government answers to the people, their beliefs, and their values, not the other way around. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. McCoy? All right, thank you for your comments. Jeff, you're up next.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jeff Daugherty here today on behalf of FGA Action. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin by thanking the sponsor for bringing this bill and for her relentless dedication to protecting our constitutional rights, which I know is important to every single person on this committee. The previous two speakers did a fantastic job, Mr. Chairman, so in the interest of time, I won't echo what they said, but what I will simply make are two remaining points. One is, when we're compelled to express the ideas of others, it is the furthest thing from free speech. And I hope that this committee will support the intent of this bill to protect my right not to have to say things that others would have me say. Additionally, it infringes on my conscience when I'm made to express things that I find morally objectionable to me. That is not in keeping with my constitutional rights. And the last point I'll make, Mr. Chairman, is this bill just simply limits government overreach, which is something that I always appreciate and will always stand for. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, and in echoing the previous speaker's comments, I'm going to conclude and stand for any questions this committee may have.
Any questions? No? All right, thank you. Mr. Correnti, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going to change hats. Just going to testify as Joey Correnti, retired combat veteran of the U.S. Army. Spent many years fighting for liberties that maybe I didn't fully understand or that were exercised by people I didn't agree with. We're talking about compelling speech here. We'll talk about restricting speech as I lead into it. I spent years fighting for people that wanted and actually burned American flags right in front of me. And it was harder when I was no longer in uniform to continue to support their right to do that. That's on the restricting side. But we have to look at both sides. Restricting the speech, I think the basis of this bill isn't what I've heard on both sides in the testimony so far. This is a may but don't have to. And if you choose not to, and then these other things happen, here is a path. You are being protected. So I hear all the emotional pleas, all the scenarios, all the fears, the chilling effects. I don't see any of that in this actual bill. To answer the good senator from the university city, his question about, well, what if I'm talking to my colleague? There are other remedies. In this situation, you have legislative rules, you have ethics hearings that you can deal with that. But you can also look at Article 1, Section 20 of our Constitution that says if you're doing something in that harassing manner with your speech, the freedom of speech, libel and truth, every person may freely speak and write and publish on all subjects, being responsible for the abuse of that right. And then all trials for libel, both civil, criminal, and truth, and defamation. So there are other things, including what was spoken to earlier, hostile work environment, other things that are protected that have nothing to do with the individual identity or imaginary identity that's being asked to be protected here as some special class. I think it's more important to look at Article 1, Section 2 of our state constitution. Under equality of all, inherent in their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all members of the human race are equal. That's on both sides. It's not saying because I decide to be an imaginary creature or slightly different than what I really am in reality, you have to engage in that. Go pursue your happiness. But again, we are compelling people to embrace and adopt maybe something that they don't believe is true. And ultimately, what I'd like to have looked at is the fiscal note on this bill. It's an immeasurable impact right now. We have to wait to see what may happen if somebody engages in a court action, okay. But right here in the capital city, in the past year, we've had a substitute teacher that was removed for not playing ball with the, I have a government piece of paper that has a name that you want me to sign as being present, and that person is not willing to say they are that person. This is an official registry document that he has to sign, and he got fired. And it cost this city, maybe the county, ultimately the taxpayers across the state, $250,000. So any immeasurable impact on the financial or the fiscal note for this bill can also be pushed the other way with all of the lawsuits that are going to be avoided because you're no longer firing substitute teachers for demanding that the person's name on the paper be repeated and accepted before he applies his signature to an official document. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Correnti? All right, thank you. Ms. Russell, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathy Russell, Executive Director for the Wyoming Republican Party. I am here today speaking on behalf of them. We have a number of resolutions that would be construed to be in support of this bill. This is a proactive bill to defend our number one amendment, which is freedom of speech. And there's been a very clear and compelling arguments debated on the floor when resolutions were passed in support of these kinds of issues. I think this is narrow in terms of compelled speech. I'm speaking personally now because it addresses only the use of pronouns. But I know we've seen over the past years compelled speech on a number of issues. And so just in general, the Republican Party stands in support of this bill to be proactive and provide a defense. And with that, I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Ms. Russell? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Any other testimony? You certainly can. Senator Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I believe that this bill is vital to protect our First Amendment rights and our thoughts and our freedom of speech. I'm not going to go into a big, long speech about things that I've heard and things that I know around the state that have occurred, but I am in support of this bill. And so I just want that on the record. Thank you.
Any questions for the senator? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Is that your first time testifying to a committee?
No, I did it today.
Oh, darn it. I was hoping that we could be the first for you. Mr. Melia, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Olson. It's good to see you and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity. I stand in support of this bill, and my thoughts as I was reading this bill over and having been in government.
Can you start by introducing yourself?
Oh, I thought I did.
I introduced you.
Oh, I introduced
But
you.
that's not how it works. You have to introduce yourself.
Okay, user mode.
And then after you do that, can you please remove your hat?
Oh, yes. I wanted to cover up my bald spot. Sorry. My name is Steve Melia from Cheyenne, Wyoming here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. As I was looking this bill over and reading it and having been in the Navy and in the government and being with a lot of different people, I was thinking the social and political left assumes the right and authority to make new mandatory rules for society, and we're all supposed to obey them. Down the road, they'll make new rules, and I'm thinking, where will it end? Will self-identification rule the day? I keep thinking, somebody's going to come up and can declare themselves a deity, a god, and we're going to have to say, Your Highness, Your Majesty, my Lord. And I go, that's going to get total chaos. Fluidity can change at the drop of a hat, and we're going to have to wear name tags with Velcro strips because I'm just going to change it from one pronoun to another. Again, there's going to be total chaos, and they seem to be making all these rules. They come up with preferred pronouns, hate speech, triggering, safe spaces, microaggressions, and my favorite one is, what was your assigned sex at birth? Nobody was assigned a sex. They just came up with that, and all of a sudden we seem to be going along with it. And at 10 o'clock every morning, when I was over in the house prays to God for guidance and wisdom and that sort of stuff. Well, I guess we're acknowledging that he exists, and he made us male and female, and that's a reality. Changing it goes against all of history, and it would result in chaos again and minority tyranny. So as far as being compelled, I would say no. If somebody wants to be called and somebody else agrees, fine, go ahead. But as far as telling everybody they have to call me this or that or something else, a lot of people are just going to say, no, we're not going to do it. So I support this bill, and I appreciate your vote.
Any questions, committee? All right, thank you, Mr. Melia. Anyone else wishing to testify on this bill? Ms. Burlingame.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. My name is Sarah Burlingame, and I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming Equality. And we are in opposition to this bill. And I believe I just erased my notes. If anybody says it's an act of God, I'm gonna, okay, got it. Apologies. It's an act of something. Gentlemen, in the absence of state mandated genitalia and chromosome testing, all pronouns are preferred. And I think we all share a sense that state mandated chromosome and genitalia testing should be far outside of what this body would consider the role of government. So what stops us from referring to you as chairwoman, as was brought up earlier? My own good sense does. My own sense of civility and good manners stops me from doing that. And all of these exist outside of a government mandate. And there are unintended consequences that I don't believe that the bringer of this bill or anybody who supports it would ever want to see. And Senator Crum, you brought this up when you asked what would stop someone from using it to haze. And nothing would stop someone from using it to haze. There isn't any line in this bill that would offer a solution to that. And I do think that the continued bad faith effort to name someone a gender that they don't identify with, that is bullying, and it is a form of cruelty. And unfortunately, as bills like these that have sought to address gender and find some kind of solution to this place where we are with this discomfort around gender, and that we have not found a good Wyoming solution for, we see that bullying rise. Not as bad as the state to our west in Utah. I think there are some really profoundly disturbing examples of adults bullying children and asking for people to reveal or show their gender or have something, particularly athletes, particularly young girls who are good athletes. And I think that kind of compulsion, that kind of bullying around prove to me what your gender is, takes a time, adolescence that is already really fraught for everybody, and adds another layer of, well, now the government wants you to become, now the government wants to compel you to bring that forward, and we're going to allow people who want to bully you a venue to do it. And I don't think that's anybody's intention, obviously. I think everyone stands against that, but I don't see anything in this bill that would stop it. I think that the great social contract is the agreement between people and the government to create a functional, pluralistic society. So that means that I surrender my desire for purity. I surrender my desire for a utopia where everybody does the thing that I like. Have I used the title honorable to refer to people I think probably have less honor than your average billy goat? Absolutely, I have. Because that's the gig, that's the deal. Why did I do it? Not because the government mandated and said, you know, Ms. Burlingame, we're going to compel you. I did it because it's good manners. And in Wyoming, that has seen us through a really long way. And I would just, I would encourage everyone here to keep relying on that home training, our sense of good manners, our sense that, our desire that people feel comfortable in their workforces and that they're not a hostile state. This works, and I would encourage you gentlemen to continue that proud Wyoming tradition and to resist this bill. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Ms. Burlingame, just to the point of the hostile work environment, even though if this bill doesn't provide a protection for hazing, if a person were subject to a hostile work environment, regardless of this legislation, they could still bring an equal opportunity claim under federal law, or file a complaint rather, against a person who's creating a hostile work environment, correct?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think we might have some attorneys here who could answer that more fulsomely, or maybe some attorneys here who could also answer that. My understanding of it, though, is that this bill does give them leeway to say, hey, I am protected. You know, this person has accused me of misgendering them, but I sincerely believe that I am responding to, you know, what I think is their gender, and this bill protects my right to do it. That's their preferred gender. It's not the one I want to use, it's their preferred.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Burlingame? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public testimony? I was just gonna say nobody signed up online. Oh, it's just not on my sheet? Okay. Welcome, Mr. Sharp.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Matt Sharp, and I serve as Senior Counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. Teachers and other public employees cannot be forced to deny their core beliefs or to say things that are untrue just to keep their job. Yet that's what happened to John Klug. He's a high school orchestra teacher in Indiana. He was an engaging teacher. He cared about his students. He led the orchestra to performing better than ever. And yet the school district didn't care about the quality of his teaching. It was concerned with only one thing, forcing him to use preferred pronouns. But because Mr. Klug is deeply religious and believes that following this policy would force him to violate his beliefs, he was forced out of his job simply because he didn't want to be forced, like this bill is trying to protect, from using preferred pronouns. This also happened to Peter Vlaming, a high school teacher in Virginia, Vivian Garrity, a middle school English teacher in Ohio. And as we heard, the same thing is now happening here in Wyoming. Policies similar to those are being used to force individuals like Gene Clementson, who was told he couldn't be a substitute teacher for Laramie County School District because he was unwilling to use inaccurate pronouns to address a male as an individual, to address a male individual as a female. But our freedom of speech and freedom of religion includes the freedom not to endorse messages that are contrary to our core beliefs. And that's why we're seeing a growing number of courts ruling against government officials that try and force employees to violate their deeply held beliefs and personally endorse radical gender ideology just to keep their job. So for example, Pamela Ricard, a math teacher in Kansas who was suspended for declining to use inaccurate pronouns, had a ruling by a federal court that policy violated her First Amendment rights. In Peter Vlaming's case, the Virginia Supreme Court ruled that teachers can't be forced to use inaccurate pronouns, that they can't be forced to be a mouthpiece for controversial religious, political, or ideological causes. In fact, the court there said, the government cannot coerce people into pledging verbal allegiance to ideological views that violate their sincerely held religious beliefs. And even the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of a college professor, Dr. Nicholas Merriweather, who was disciplined for declining to use preferred pronouns. There, the Sixth Circuit said, if professors, quote, lacked free speech protections, then a university could wield alarming power to compel ideological conformity. It could force a university faculty member to declare that war is just if they were pacifists, could require a civil rights icon to condemn the Freedom Riders, a believer to deny the existence of God, or a Soviet immigrant to address his students as comrades. That cannot be, said the court. And that's because words, including pronouns, have meaning. They carry a message with them. And for many Americans, that message is that a person has an immutable biological sex that's written into every cell of their body. So just like we would never tell a teacher or someone else that they have to respond to someone saying Christ is risen with the traditional response of he is risen indeed, just like we wouldn't tell a teacher that they have to respond to a Muslim student with Allahu Akbar, because in those situations, we would be forcing a teacher to speak something, to affirm a belief or ideology with which she disagrees. And same is true of gender ideology. Finally, just three quick things I wanted to bring up in response to some questions. Number one, Bostock did not hold that gender identity is a protected class. In fact, the court specifically said in its opinion that the only statutorily protected characteristic at issue in that case was sex, not gender identity. Number two, I know there was the question and was just brought up again about, well, does this allow for harassment? Of course not. Nothing in this prohibits any government entity from being able to prohibit harassment or other verbal abuse. This simply protects the right to remain silent, the right not to speak a preferred pronoun that violates someone's beliefs. And finally, I know early on there was the question about damages. And while we would defer to the committee and the sponsor's decision on that, when you have individuals that are fired, that lose their job, part of that remedy of making them whole for this violation of the right to free speech could include back pay. So we would just want to make sure that if a great teacher here in Wyoming was forced out of her job, that there would be that ability to either get reinstated or get back pay when her rights are violated. Thank you, and I'm happy to stand for any additional questions.
Any questions for Mr. Sharp? Yes, Senator Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I just want to, because I think Senator Crum as drafted, Senator Crum hit on what I would call a hole in the drafting. And I know where we're going with the intent, and I don't guess maybe we could use some of your help to clear that up. But as I read it, if Senator Crum wants to call me she, he can do that. And there's nothing if we were coworkers, there's nothing in the language of this bill that would prevent him from doing that. And so I think there's a possibility for some language. I just don't know. You guys are more schooled in constitutional law than I, but I think at some point, if we add language preventing that, then we risk the bill being unconstitutional or more likely to be unconstitutional. And so any thoughts on that?
Mr. Sharp?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator. So first I go back, this bill is specifically focused on protecting the right to remain silent. It just simply says you can't be compelled or required to refer to someone by an inaccurate pronoun. That's it. This would not address a situation where someone is saying, I'm going to call someone by this name or this pronoun. This is simply when a employer comes and says, you must refer to this person by this pronoun, you must refer to this male as a female, and the employee says, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I would prefer not to do that. You can't terminate that person. So this is a targeted bill on that problem that we do see popping up across the country and here in Wyoming. Outside of that, there are plenty of other ways that the government already has to be able to prevent harassment, verbal abuse, things like that, that this bill is not interfering with. Those would still be allowed. This is specifically protecting, though, that right to not be forced or required to say something that the individual doesn't want to.
Other questions? No? All right, thank you, Mr. Sharp. With that, I will close public comment, public testimony, and committee, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, move the bill.
It's been moved by Senator Hicks. Amendments to this bill. Senator Crago?
All right, Mr. Chairman, this is just going to sort of follow up when I asked about damages. So if we go to the bottom of page 2, very last word on the page, strike the word recover. Top of page 3, line 1, strike the words appropriate relief, comma, including. Insert the word seek. Line 2, after relief, strike the comma, strike the remainder of line 2, and strike the word court and costs on line 3, leaving the period. So it would read, any person aggrieved by a violation of subsection A of this section may file a civil action in any court of competent jurisdiction against the state or any political subdivision and its employees acting in their official capacities responsible for the violation to seek injunctive or declaratory relief, period.
And just so we're clear, even without subsection B, a person would already have the ability to seek injunctive or declaratory relief.
That is true, Mr. Chairman.
But they wouldn't necessarily have the ability to recover damages and attorney's fees unless that's statutorily granted?
That's correct.
So your amendment effectively makes it so if an employee were terminated, they could not seek lost wages?
Not under this particular
Not
law.
under the statute.
Now, I think we've heard, and there were damages granted in a case right here in this county or as part of a settlement. And so there are other methods for relief, federal law. And so I don't think we need to do it here. And that's just my opinion, what's up for discussion. But there are other avenues for relief to seek that.
Any other discussion on the amendment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, that amendment does carry.
Mr. Chairman, and so along with that amendment, and I should have done it all at the same time because they go together, we would need to strike the remainder of page 3, lines 5 through 20. And that's carving out the immunity.
So section 2.
And deleting section 2 and renumber as necessary.
All right, any discussion on that amendment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
No. All right. Help me understand why that has to be removed.
So if you're not going to remove that, Mr. Chairman, then you need to put the amendment we just took out back in. So if you're going to grant damages, then you need to have both of those provisions. If you're not going to grant a right to seek civil damages, then the immunity needs to come out because you don't have to, an action for declaratory judgment or injunctive relief does not go through the Governmental Claims Act and it's not subject to the Governmental Claims Act and there's not all the deadlines and timelines that are subject to that as well. So you can file an injunctive case whenever you want.
Okay. Then we'll redo that amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No.
All right, that amendment does carry. Any other amendments to this bill?
Question.
Mr. Chairman,
Discussion.
I'm sorry.
Senator, are you discussing or are you offering an amendment?
No new amendment.
Okay, you want to discuss the bill?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Senator Crum.
So just a question back to where Senator Crago was earlier about this idea of using, if you're using he and she and him and her, that there's not a penalty for that. Maybe we don't need to put anything in the bill for that, but I'm just want to make sure. And here's where I'm going. So I've had two situations personally that have happened where I've got in trouble unknowingly, but got in trouble for this. One was at a institution of higher learning in this state. I was attending a theater performance, and I thanked the person serving in the concession stand. I said, thank you, ma'am, or something like that, and for whatever I got. And I got approached sitting down in my seat by, I'm going to call it a supervisor or something, that I address that person by their wrong pronoun. And if I don't correct my action, I'm going to be asked to leave. Well, I had no idea it was a lady. I said, thank you, ma'am. So I was in trouble for being polite, I guess. And then I had another one on a large major airline where I said basically the same thing. I got on board and said, thank you, sir. Or something like that, and the pilot came back and said, if I continue to harass the flight attendant, I'm going to be kicked off the airline. And so I've seen it twice personally, and so I'm in favor of the bill. I just want to make sure we aren't getting the use of traditional, I don't know the right word, but the use of traditional pronouns are protected or whatever, or whatever. That's where I'm at. And I'm just asking a question because I'm not a legal scholar here.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Hicks?
just to, reviewing that, I don't think this bill even contemplates that. It's strictly if a governmental entity did that, you could potentially fall underneath this. I think that would have to come under either harassment or a whole other new statutory scheme to deal with this issue. Certainly it's real, but I don't know how we would integrate that into this particular piece of legislation.
Any other discussion on this Senate file? Yes? Hold on, let's see. Yeah.
Well, we're bringing that back.
Providing, line 4, providing an exception to the Wyoming Governmental Claims Act, line 4 and 5 should be deleted. And then I think technically we're still good on authorizing a civil remedy. I think we're good. That's all that needs to be deleted. Any other discussion on this Senate file? All right. Pierre, will you please do a roll call vote on Senate File 77?
Senator Crago?
Aye.
Senator Crum?
Aye.
Senator Hicks?
Aye.
Senator Kolb?
Aye.
Chairman Olson?
Aye.
5 ayes.
There you have it, Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, gentlemen.
It's just a rule that no bill can pass through judiciary without being amended, so sorry.
Oh, yeah.
All right. I know a good portion of the room, you're here for Senate File 117, shared parenting. I'll look at our schedule, but most likely that bill will probably be carried over to our next scheduled meeting, which is Thursday. And it would be the first bill that we would consider on Thursday. But I will make that formal announcement later today when I have the notices put together. So, thank you. We are adjourned.